Just before Christmas 2025, the Supreme Court blocked the Trump administration's attempt to deploy the National Guard to Chicago to manage protests over federal immigration policies. In a 6-3 emergency ruling, the court halted the president's use of military forces for domestic law enforcement, marking a major check on presidential power. The case moved rapidly to the Supreme Court after Chicago challenged the deployment of nearly 300 National Guard troops from Texas. Lower courts had already sided with Chicago, questioning the legal basis for the deployment. The Supreme Court's decision is not a final ruling, but it signals deep skepticism about the president's authority in this context. At the heart of the decision is the principle that the military should not be used for civilian law enforcement, a tradition rooted in the Posse Comitatus Act. The court found that the situation in Chicago did not meet the high bar required to bypass this law. The ruling forces a national conversation about the limits of executive power and the role of the military at home. For many Americans, it raises questions about safety, liberty, and federal authority. The decision doesn't resolve these tensions, but it places a firm legal barrier on this specific use of presidential power. The broader debate over immigration, states' rights, and federal authority continues in the courts and the public arena. The legal battle began with the Trump administration's aggressive immigration enforcement, which led to the removal of millions of undocumented immigrants. Chicago, a city with a large immigrant population, saw months of protests, sometimes escalating into violent clashes with federal agents. The administration claimed a severe threat to federal officers, citing a surge in attacks on ICE agents, and argued that local police couldn't protect federal property. Nearly 300 National Guard troops, from Texas, were sent to Chicago in October 2025 to protect federal buildings. Supporters called it a necessary response to lawlessness. Critics, including Mayor Brandon Johnson, called it political intimidation that would only escalate tensions. Chicago leaders argued the threat was exaggerated to justify a show of force against a city opposing the administration's immigration agenda. This fundamental disagreement over facts and presidential authority set the stage for a rapid legal showdown. The dispute quickly reached the Supreme Court, reflecting the urgency and stakes involved. The Supreme Court's majority focused on a federal statute that allows the president to use military forces only when regular forces can't execute the law. The administration argued regular forces meant federal law enforcement like ICE, but the court disagreed, saying it refers to the active duty military. Since the president hadn't tried to use the regular military, he hadn't met the legal requirements to deploy the National Guard. The majority also referenced the Posse Comitatus Act, which generally forbids military involvement in domestic policing except in rare, extreme cases. The court found that Chicago's situation didn't rise to that level. By blocking the deployment, the court signaled it would require a strong legal justification before allowing military involvement in civilian affairs. The ruling was narrow, leaving open the possibility for the administration to make a more detailed case in lower courts. However, the justices made clear their skepticism of the administration's current legal theory. The decision reinforces statutory limits on presidential power in domestic crises. The Supreme Court's decision sparked immediate passionate reactions across the political spectrum. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson called it a victory for local autonomy and a check on federal overreach. The White House, while disappointed, vowed to keep enforcing immigration laws and protecting federal personnel. Supporters of the president saw the ruling as a legal technicality that ignored real dangers on the ground. Dissenting justices, led by Samuel Alito, argued the court acted too quickly and left federal officers at risk. Justice Neil Gorsuch objected to the rushed process, saying such complex issues deserve fuller debate in lower courts. The split opinions highlight the court's struggle to balance public safety with legal principles and the judiciary's role. Though specific to Chicago, the Supreme Court's order sets a precedent that could affect National Guard deployments in other cities. The ruling gives local leaders a powerful legal tool to challenge similar federal actions, especially in cities like Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. It emboldens state and city governments to resist federal pressure and assert their autonomy. The decision provides a legal roadmap for blocking military involvement in domestic law enforcement under these circumstances. For the administration, it forces a strategic reassessment and narrows the president's options. The ruling shifts the balance of power, giving cities more leverage in federal-state conflicts. The coming months will reveal whether these tensions escalate or move toward resolution. Deploying the National Guard in American cities has historical precedent, but context matters. Past presidents like Eisenhower and Kennedy used military force to enforce federal court orders and protect constitutional rights, not to quell dissent against executive policies. In Chicago, the administration sought to use the Guard to protect federal agents during protests against its own policies, a key legal and historical distinction. Critics argue this is fundamentally different from enforcing court-ordered rights. The Supreme Court's caution reflects the high bar for military intervention in domestic affairs. Each past deployment has sparked debate about the proper use of military force in a democracy. The court's decision underscores that the specific reason for deployment is crucial in the eyes of the law. The bar for such interventions remains extremely high. With the Supreme Court blocking the National Guard deployment, attention turns to whether the president might invoke the Insurrection Act, a far more drastic step. The act gives the president broad authority to deploy active-duty troops to suppress rebellion or enforce federal law in extraordinary circumstances. Invoking it would bypass the legal constraints just reinforced by the court and could trigger a constitutional crisis. Such a move would be legally and politically explosive, likely leading to immediate court challenges. The debate would shift from statutory interpretation to the fundamental balance of power in American government. The Supreme Court's ruling reaffirms the judiciary's role as a check on executive authority, yet the possibility of more extreme measures highlights the ongoing stress test for American institutions. The true impact of this decision will depend on how leaders and citizens respond in the days ahead.